Hey everyone, popping on here to discuss week 5 commentary, waste with a long half-life, and the case study of nuclear waste. And boy, if you didn't have any kind of resentment towards local officials and government and any kind of distrust, well, I'm sure you have some now, because these case studies and this learning from this week was chock full of them. We really learned about the secrecy of uranium mining and production and processing, and under the table deals and cover-ups from man-made disasters that have just since gone on for quite some time, and just the environmental injustices that tend to follow from these mishaps. And it was interesting watching the atomic home front. We've learned countless times about environmental injustices that happen in low socioeconomic areas of underrepresented populations, and whereas this landfill disaster with nuclear waste was happening in the suburbs of what seemed to be like a middle class residencies. So it could happen anywhere and to anyone, so no one is excluded from that, which is pretty terrifying. But this week was great to learn about something that I relatively have no idea about. I've never really studied the nuclear industry and the issues that arise from that, and just how complex that it is. So it was cool to expand my horizons and learn more about stuff that I was unfamiliar with. So we were prompted to ask a couple questions. I found the documentary about the wildlife very fascinating, and how much nature is negatively affected by human existence, and how resilient nature can be when left alone. So some of the questions that I had, I had wrote down just as I was watching. If animals were to be rescued from the Chernobyl area site and bred, would their offspring be born with the same radioactive contamination? And I believe that it would, because it's in tune with our genetics once you're predisposed to those contaminations. So that could be harmful to offspring, to reproductive health, and so on and so forth. Can animals be cured from radiation exposure? I did some quick research online and found that radiation can be treatable. Small amounts can maybe dissipate over time, but ultimately it's something that that kind of stays with you. And I hope I read that correctly. And that kind of goes into another off-topic question that I have about how it was really mind-boggling that there's a lot of research done about radiation in high dosage and like short-term effects from radiation. However, not a lot of research about minuscule amounts of radiation over a long period of time, which we seem to possibly have the technology to uncover that, and at least have a better idea on long-term chronic conditions apart from cancer, which we're aware of, that can be a result of small radiation exposure over a long period of time. I can imagine we have the infrastructure to learn more about that. I'm surprised that we haven't. I found it was really cool that over 40 protected animals on the endangered species list were discovered. And I just had a question about what does that mean for environmentalists and scientists? What are they doing about these findings? It appears that quite a bit of studying of these species are going on. However, are they capturing and bringing them to a safe location that isn't radiated contamination. And then, it seems kind of like great that they're, thriving and that they're reproducing, and that we're seeing these species come back after they've been protected and almost endangered, but at the same time they're affected by radiation poisoning. So how good is that for the longevity of things, and how is that going to alter their DNA and their mutations over time if they are to reproduce? And then I also found it interesting that it mentioned how there's restricted zones that people can't, I think it was like 30 kilometers or something like that around the Chernobyl site, that they won't allow human access. However, these animals are completely able to and have the free will to go in and out of these zones. And how does that look with spreading contamination and affecting those that are outside of those restricted zones? And then kind of straying away from that documentary, I found it. Another one of my questions is how, from a moral standpoint, as well as everything with legalities, with the Japanese women and anti-nuclear activism after the Fukushima. I hope I'm saying that correctly. It says that it took Japanese government to publicly admit the extent to which the radiation had been released. And during that same time period, they changed their definition of acceptable radiation from 1 MSV to 20 MSV, thereby minimizing the number of evacuation zones, which seems like a huge travesty and a huge ordeal, because 1 to 20 is, I don't know those measurements, obviously, but that seems like quite a big jump. And just seeing how shady the government can be in those within the realms of radiation, and doesn't seem like they have the best interests in mind of others. And I just don't see how that could be legal. I guess if there's no one above you, then who's to say what's legal and what's not, and who's to get you in trouble for it or fault you? I guess that's why it's important to have these these activism groups to hold governments accountable and lobby for change. And it just shows, it was just really disheartening to see that these women were fighting so hard for their children, for their own well-being, just to be labeled as having radiation brain and radiophobic and hysterical, essentially. It just seems very much like gaslighting from a patriarchy standpoint in an industry that's so dominated by male presence that they, don't take women seriously. They don't hear what they have to say. And it's kind of just like everything else that we've learned about with waste, just out of sight, out of mind issues. I believe that's all I wanted to talk about. I know I'm running over just a bit. But yeah, a lot of disheartening things that were watched and read. And I know it's going to become even more of an issue pressing forward as we try to move away from natural resources to nuclear power. And I'm hoping that, citing and these environmental injustices don't go unheard, and that, everybody gets represented in this realm. But yeah, thanks for listening. Bye-bye.